If this merger happens, US Airways' aggressive discounting, which they call advantage fares, will disappear. As a bigger airline with many more hubs, the new American will have no incentive to offer any of the discounts I just described. That will result in higher prices, less choice, and fewer services for the more than 2 million travelers who today benefit from the program.
The marriage of American Airlines and US Airways hits major turbulence after the U.S. Justice Department files suit to block the merger. You just heard from the Assistant Attorney General in the Antitrust Division. I'm Wendy Bounds. Thanks for joining us here on WSJ Live. Jack Nicas, our WSJ Airline reporter, he joins us right now from Chicago with the details. Jack, was this expected?
This was unexpected, and this is a very big deal. This is a long-planned merger of American and U.S. Airways. This was seen as sort of the final step in the full consolidation of the U.S. airline industry, and it would add a third giant airline to the top of the industry among Delta, United, and the new American, or what would have been. But now the Justice Department is saying no, and they're seeking to block the merger outright. And now the U.S. Airways stock has plunged today, and that's potentially adding to the likelihood that this deal may never actually happen.
You mentioned the stock plunging today of U.S. Airways, wondering what the next step will be for these two airlines. Where do you go from here, Jack?
Well, I mean, essentially, you're going to go through this process now. You're going to go through the court process of the two sides trying to prove whether or not this deal does hurt competition. You do have American still in bankruptcy. They're scheduled on Thursday to have essentially a final hearing on their reorganization plan, which is to merge with U.S. Airways. Obviously, that is contingent on approval from the Justice Department. But what we've seen in the past is the Justice Department tried to block a merger in 1999 and in 2001 between U.S. Airways and United. And when the Justice Department wanted to block these deals, it got its way, and those deals eventually fell apart. So the history is not good for American U.S. Airways here, but it's going to be some time before we really know.
You and our airline teams have pointed out in your reporting that about 85% of U.S. airline seats are controlled by American, Delta, United Continental, that's one airline, and Southwest. Doesn't it become sort of hard for U.S. Airways and American to push back in light of that stat, Jack?
Well, so that stat would be if American and U.S. Airways were allowed to merge. And, certainly that is a very compelling statistic. I mean, it shows that there's going to be, if this merger goes forward, such concentration at the top of the U.S. airline industry. However, American and U.S. Airways' argument is that this merger actually would increase competition. And by not allowing American and U.S. Airways to merge, they instead would flounder and not be able to compete with these big behemoths of United and Delta, themselves previous products of recent mergers and the two largest airlines in the world. And American says, without this merger, we can't be viable competitors. So therefore, by not allowing us to merge, you're putting us in an uncompetitive sort of position, and we eventually won't be able to exist.
Jack, just before you go, I mean, the Justice Department citing Washington, D.C. as a place where competition could be particularly reduced. What other hubs where American U.S. Airways are now, what are the other ones that could possibly have consolidation and maybe people would see fewer flights, higher prices there, just that analysts are talking about?
It's a good question. So each airline has its own hubs where they basically have built what they call fortress hubs, and they're very dominant in these cities. American has Miami and Dallas. It also is very competitive in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. U.S. Airways basically controls the markets in Charlotte, North Carolina, Philadelphia, and Phoenix. But together in Washington, D.C., they would be a major carrier, particularly at Reagan National, and also they would gain significant market share at LaGuardia in New York and overall at the New York market, and also, interestingly, two cities where neither of them are big now but would suddenly become the biggest or one of the biggest carriers there would be in Boston and in Tampa, Florida. So this airline, if it ever is allowed to merge, would be the biggest airline in the world and would have the most robust domestic network by far.
All right, well, that's an if now. We'll continue to follow this saga with you and our airline team. Thanks so much, Jack. Appreciate it.